Hello and good morning and welcome to the UCD Lyons Dairy webinar. It's fantastic to be able to join this morning over Zoom. So my name is Nicholas Ryan. I am the postdoctoral researcher here at the project. So our dairy system is, our research has been running since 2016 and we are investigating the development of a profitable high output grass-based spring milk production system due to considerations from the environmental concerns, increasing dairy cow numbers, the quota removal and the lack of, due to fragmented farms. We're joined today by several panelists, including Alan Fahy, who is the Associate Professor of Animal Nutrition, Animal Breeding, in UCD. Zoe McKay, Associate Professor of Dairy Production in UCD. Finbar Mulligan, Associate Professor of Animal Nutrition. Michael Wallace, Professor of Agriculture and Food Economics, as well as by members of our project, Niall Walsh and Kieran MacDonald, who are both involved as well. So I'd like to, first of all, thank you again for coming today. And we'll start off with Finbar Mulligan, who will start our talk. So I'll ask the other panelists, please, to turn off their camera and to mute their microphone. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to our webinar. Normally at Lyons Farm, in different times, we would have several groups in to talk about this project, to visit the farm, consider the project every year. However, we're living in very difficult times with COVID-19, so we thought it would be a useful exercise in terms of getting the output from this project to the people that need the outputs by using a webinar. So what we're going to be talking about today is development of a profitable high output grass-based spring milk production system. And this research is conducted at Lyons Farm, obviously, and it's a farm where we have the School of Agriculture and Food Science and the School of Veterinary Medicine taking an interest. So just before I begin, I just want to acknowledge, there we go. Just acknowledge that this project was funded initially by the Dairy Tech group of companies through Enterprise Ireland and an innovation partnership. And the project is funded currently by Dairy Research Ireland, and it's funded by Dairy Research Ireland since 2019 up to the current year. So in all regions then, sustainable dairy production is favoured where you have high quality native forage that's abundantly available and cheap to produce. So in Ireland then, our ability to grow abundant high quality fresh herbage means that the feed budget for the year can be based primarily on grazed and conserved grass. And grazing also means that the labour requirement for most of the year is low, and it also means we have a low labour requirement for feed preparation. Using the grass-based system also means that we have a competitive advantage in terms of our production costs, and it also gives us a marketing advantage as well in terms of being able to promote the fact that our cows are in their natural environment. So in Ireland then, the dairy production system that has predominated, or the characteristics that have developed, is grazing for most of the year. The diet is mostly from grazed or conserved grass. We have a compact seasonal calving at the start of the grazing season. It's a low feed input, low output system, the average being approximately 1 tonnes, with the advised amount being much lower than that. Our milk solids production on average is about 417 kilos of fat and protein per cow annually, or about 5,500 kilos of milk annually on average. So the grazing systems that have developed here then, they're based on low output per cow, and certainly it's a fact that what we can say about them is with good cost control and with high stocking rates, high profitability from this grazing system is certainly possible. However, we now think there are reasons to consider a grazing system that might be based on high output per cow, or at least to investigate such a system. One of the big reasons, of course, is that since December 2010, dairy cow numbers in Ireland have increased by approximately 40%. And of course, this gives rise to concerns with regard to the environment. issues like methane emissions, ammonia emissions, the nitrogen load to inland waters, and certainly it's been widely reported that there's a concern over future of the derogation from the Nitrates Directive. So this is certainly something that a lot of people in the environmental area are watching, this increase in dairy cow numbers. The increase in dairy cow numbers also creates issues at farm level. Traditionally, farms in Ireland are small in area, and the increase in dairy cow numbers in the country has meant that we have a lot of fragmented farms and farms with fragmented land resources, which of course makes dairy farming more difficult. We also have limited buildings and infrastructure on the farm, and of course it's widely reported that we have a limited skilled labour pool available, which has the potential then to create issues with poor work-life balance for farm families. We certainly have some evidence about this farm fragmentation being an issue. So, a limiting factor to expansion on many dairy farms is the availability of land around the milking platform. And it's been reported that the average farm in Ireland consists of about 3.5 land parcels. And in another report of Tipperary co-op suppliers, it's been reported that for every hectare farmers have on the milking platform, they have a further 0.6 or 0.7 hectares away from the milking platform. So by increasing our dairy cow numbers, it certainly creates issues at a national level, which environmental lobbyists and people with environmental concerns are raising, and it creates issues also at a farm level. So some questions which might be relevant to consider is it possible at a national level to produce the amount of milk or dairy product that we need for our milk processors with less cows? We might consider, is it possible to maintain the same amount of dairy farm businesses with less cows and lower stocking rates per farm? And we might consider then, if some farms adopt a high output grass-based model, will this help industry sustainability or not? So with this project then, we wanted to look at the development of a high output grazing system, and very simply, you could consider that there's a lot known about high input TMR type systems. Particularly, there's a lot of research maybe internationally on that system type. There's also a lot of excellent research, some of it conducted in Teagasc, Ireland, on the low input system. But if we were to look at a high output grazing system, which had high solids per cow and per hectare as a target, and that had fertility and output goals that still maintains a grass focus, where the stocking rate is less than maximum, and where we have moderate use of purchased feeds, and where maybe the farm business would be sustainable with lower cow numbers. What are the targets for such a system if farmers wanted to consider it? So it's an important thing that we were trying to do, to develop targets for a high output grazing system that might be relevant for farmers that would consider such a system. So our aim then was to incorporate the most recent advances in grassland management for dairy farms into a high output system. And I think, several, for a long time at Lyons, we were probably, meeting farmers at the very beginning who were either driven on grassland management or driven on dairy cows and high output. And we didn't see a reason why you couldn't bring all of the good technology and recent developments in grassland management into a high output system, and that's what we wanted to do. We also wanted to use a type of dairy cow that has good genetic indices for both milk production and fertility. And quite simply, we thought that there was a lot of good developments in dairy cow breeding in Ireland, and that it would probably be possible to have a genotype of cow that had good genetic indices for both production and fertility. We wanted to employ the best practices from nutrition research and dairy cow husbandry, and importantly, we wanted to incorporate advancements which enhance dairy production sustainability. So our view then is that a high output grass-based spring milk production system can be profitable. but when it's built on a foundation of good grassland management and when it meets performance targets. And by saying that, we mean meeting performance targets for output and for fertility. And we believe such a system then has a place in a sustainable Irish dairy industry. So good grassland management, good genetics and good nutrition and husbandry, we believe, are key for the success of such a system. So the system itself then, well, firstly, just to say that at UCD we have 200 dairy cows in total. And the herd that we're going to be talking about is what we call the system's research herd. And that's a high EBI spring calving group consisting of approximately 60 dairy cows. In terms of the targets for the system, the target that we have for stocking rate on the milking platform is 3.4 livestock units per hectare. The stocking rate on the whole farm, 2.4 livestock units per hectare. In terms of our output target is 625 kilos of milk solids per cow per year, which we think will be associated with a yield of about 7,500 to 8,000 kilos of milk. So in terms of fertility, one of the things that's important, I guess a lot of the attempts at high output milk production in the past in Ireland would have been associated with low fertility. But for an efficient seasonal calving system in our grazing scenario, we wanted to have a high fertility target. So our target for 6-week in calf rate in the milking herd only is 75%. And this target will be consistent with a 6-week calving down rate the following spring of 90% when heifers are also considered in the herd. In order to meet our output target of 625 kilos of fat and protein, with the amount of grass that we typically grow and utilise, and with our stocking rate on the milking platform, we think, that we need approximately 1.5 tonne or 1,500 kilos of concentrate per cow per year. On a dry matter basis, our diet is about 75% grazed grass and grass silage. But it's important maybe to point out that on an as-fed basis, the annual feed budget is approximately 93 to 94% grazed grass and grass silage. So in terms of cow genetics, that's something that Alan's going to talk about in more detail later on, so I'm going to leave that for Alan. It's very important, I would feel, to point out that grassland management is the cornerstone of this high output system. We measure grass every Monday with the plate meter, and we put all the data into pasture base, and we use all of the conventional grassland management tools. The start of the year, the spring rotation planner, the grass wedge, the autumn rotation planner. Our preference is to bale paddocks if they get ahead of us to manage quality and surpluses, and we'll only top paddocks where it's absolutely necessary. So again, even though our aim is high output, it's 625 kilos of fat and protein, it's significantly higher than the national average. It's very, very important to bear in mind that grass is the cornerstone of this system. So this is our feed budget, our estimated or predicted feed budget for 2020. So one of the first things to say is that, we tried to keep this system as simple as we possibly could. So we've only 3 feeds really in this system, grass silage, grazed grass, and the concentrate is all nuts fed through the parlour. So you can see there, depending on the time of the year, the diet is going to be made up of concentrate, nuts in the parlour, grass and grass silage. You'll see as well that our dairy cows get supplemented with concentrate for all of the year. And we start off with concentrate supplementation levels of about 8 kilos per head per day, from the point at about 2 weeks after calving, that's what it would be. And at the end of the year, we're probably talking about supplementation in and around 3 kilos per cow per day as a target. Now, we do have flexibility around that. A good example might be in 2020, we had a mini drought in May and June at Lyons, and we did have to maintain higher levels of concentrate feed than we had planned to do. And similarly, at the end of the year in 2020, our cows seemed to have good body condition score, and we took some concentrate out or fed a lower level than what we had planned to do. So in terms of the performance of the herd then from 2016 to 2020, that's what we're going to consider next. So this slide then shows you the herd performance in terms of milk output for the target. The 2016 data, the 2017, 18, 19 and 2020 data. And the 2020 data is up to the 17th of December. So you can see here probably the most important thing to look at here is the target for milk solids of 625 kilos of fat and protein. And you can see here, this is what we actually produced. So in 2016, 588, 595 in 2017. 2018, we had a year where we had a very poor performance. Generally speaking, we would view that was associated with two significant weather events, the beast from the east, a snowstorm in March, and then we had a significant drought that you'll all remember in 2018. 2019, we had a relatively good year, 586 kilos of fat and protein per cow. And in 2020, 598 kilos of fat and protein per cow, up to the 17th of December. So 2020 was a very good year for output for us. So we certainly did have one year where we had an underperformance. We would feel that, you know, there is good reason for that. But for all of the other years, you know, I think the performance is reasonable, and it's certainly within 5 or 6% of our target performance of 625 kilos of fat and protein per cow. But that's the outcome. If you like a performance, that's 590 to 600 kilos of fat and protein per cow for 4 out of the 5 years that we've run this system. In terms of fertility performance, you'll see that in terms of fertility performance, our submission rates in general have always been quite good. If you notice here, then our first service conception rates started off very modest and certainly improved, and you'll see exactly the same with our 6-week pregnancy rate. So you can see that now, in fact, for the last 3 years, 2018, 2019 and 2020, we in fact have very respectable first service conception rates and very respectable 6-week pregnancy rates. And you'll see in 2020 a very good 6-week pregnancy rate of 87%. And you'll see as well our empty rate in 2020, our empty rate in 2020 was 9% after 10 weeks of breeding, and that includes the pre-breeding culls. And I think the guys in the yard, Niall Walsh and Kieran McDonald, who are on our panel this morning, you know, they do a lot of excellent work on the farm in terms of fertility management. In terms of grassland performance, you'll see from 2016 we started off, we grew 13 tonnes, 2017 14 tonnes. In 2018 we had a lower output, obviously owing to the drought. 2019 14.5 tonnes. In terms of overall herbage utilised, you'll see the figure, you know, in 16, 11.4, 13.5 in 2019, again with an underperformance in 2018. In terms of graze grass utilised per hectare, you'll see our graze grass utilised per hectare close to 10 tonne in 2016, above the 10 tonne in 2017, and in 2019 11.5 for graze grass, with obviously 2018 being again an underperformance in terms of grassland output owing to the drought. You see here then the grass growth for 2020 in comparison to 2016 to 2019 average at Lyons Farm. And you can see here that we have this significant reduction in growth rate in May and June, and this is the drought that we had in 2020. So as a result of this period of reduced growth rate in May and June, you'll see our output in terms of grass grown on the milking platform was lower, 13.6 in 2020. Overall herbage utilised in 2020, 12 tonne, approximately 12.1. And graze grass utilised per hectare in 2020, 10.7 tonne approximately. So that's the performance in terms of milk output, fertility, and some of the data we have on our grassland performance. And what I'm going to do now, in order to move on to the section on genetics and animal breeding, is hand you over to my colleague, Associate Professor Alan Fahy from the School of Agriculture and Food Science.
Thanks, Finbar. So hello everyone, my name is Alan Fahy and I'm Associate Professor of Animal Breeding in the School of Agriculture and Food Science in UCD. Just before I get started, I was just been asked by the chair to tell everybody that we'll be taking questions and answers or having a Q&A session after the last speaker today. And so any of us are available then to expand on on any of the points that you want to talk about. And if you submit your questions via the Q&A button rather than the chat button, that would be helpful. Sorry. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over the principles of our genetic selection program to support the higher input, higher output seasonal spring calving grazing system. And again, I can take the questions at the end of the talks or and expand on any of the points that I talk about. And I've also included my contact information on this slide. So if you want to get in touch with me at a later date, there's no problem with that. So just to start off, the first thing to understand is that most traits, which animal breeders call phenotypes, have both a genetic and environmental component. And the environmental component is the farm management system. It could also be weather, but typically it's a farm management type system. And these can include your health protocols, the frequency of milking, grassland management, among others, nutrition, for example, to name a few. So the environment and the cow's genetics then interact with each other. And this is what results in how the traits such as milk yield or calving interval or any of those traits are expressed. The first thing to understand is that most of the traits which animal breeders for every cow and heifer then that has a genetic potential for milk, fertility and health traits for example, the farm management system can help the cow to exceed its genetic potential, but also the farm management system can also prevent the cows reaching genetic potential. So for example, you may have a cow that has the genetic potential for a calving interval of 400 days, but by getting the cow's body condition score right at breeding, by making sure the cow is in good general health, by proper lameness protocols and so forth, and having the right soil, looking after your soil, your grassland management, etc., and ultimately also having very good heat detection systems in place, the cow's actual phenotypic performance can be much better than the 400-day genetic potential, and it could be, for example, as low as 370 days. However, if you don't get these management things correct, it could also be a lot worse than the 400 days, because if you don't detect the cow being in heat, then she has very little chance of becoming pregnant. It is important that herd genetics and management systems on your farm then complement each other. So you have to ask yourself, is the cow right for the system or the system right for the cow? The best way to achieve this is to determine what the breeding goal is for your enterprise. In other words, what do you want the genetics to do for your herd? It is important that you don't change the breeding goal too often, as you can undo some of the good work you did in previous years and you're at risk of falling between two stools. So often around the breeding season, I notice that some people are very influenced by people they talk to, and they start changing their breeding strategy midstream, and then they don't end up having anything of worth. So at Lyons, what we want to do, our breeding goal essentially is to breed a cow that has the ability to respond to concentrate feeding while maintaining very good fertility performance, as this is again important in a seasonal calving system. And to achieve this, we decide that selecting for high milk, fat and protein yield PTA will be important while making sure that fat and protein percentage PTA remain positive, and this prevents us from producing a low quality milk or white water. In addition to this, we have put an emphasis on picking cows and bulls that have a good health subindex, and then within this, then picking cows and bulls that are as high as possible on fertility. Again, as Finbar said, that grassland is the cornerstone of this system. So like a low input system, it is very important that we have a compact calving system that we can get our cows out to grass at the appropriate time. So we have used the EBI then to select our cows and our AI bulls. The milk index allows us to improve milk, fat and protein yields. In the fertility index, we pay most attention to the calving interval, which is important to all seasonal calving systems, regardless of whether you're in a high or low input system. The health index then allows us to improve lameness, somatic cell count and mastitis. So in doing this, we're providing our cows with the genetic foundation to excel in these traits. And this will support our management systems to help achieve this. It is important to note that the genetic improvement is permanent and cumulative over time, and management will provide an immediate improvement, and it is temporary. So by having a genetic and management strategy that is consistent with each other, we can achieve a profitable high input system. So what we have here then is just want to show you is this is the genetic profile of the Lyons herd based on the January 2020 evaluation. So when we're picking cows every year and selecting bulls, we basically do it on the January 2020 evaluation. And again, the EBI is extremely important in this tool, a tool in this regard. And what we try to essentially do is to get a balanced ratio of a production subindex and fertility subindex. So we have a balanced cow. What we found, and so we're going to be positive for milk yield PTA, but also positive for fat and protein yields while maintaining a positive fat and protein percentage, as previously said. So what this allows us to, what we found in some controlled experiments, nutrition experiments in Lyons, is that cows that have a good milk subindex and are positive for these milk traits, that they do actually respond better to concentrate feeding, and therefore making concentrate feeding economically sensible in this type of system. We also genomically test all our heifers when they're born. And this is done really to make sure that the heifers that are coming into the system, that we have an accurate or a more accurate genetic profile of them, and that we don't pick animals that aren't as good as what their parental average suggests. So the parental average typically has a lower reliability, but once you get the animals genomically tested, you're combining also DNA information with the parental information, boosting our reliability or our confidence in the genetic values that we have. So this allows us to, with more confidence, to select the heifers that we're going to keep, but also cull the heifers or sell the heifers that we don't want. So you can see here that overall, based on the January 2020 evaluation, the EBI of the systems herd in Lyons was in the top 1% in the country. Milk was in the top 1%, and fertility was in the top 5%. And you can see then that milk yield was at 140, PTA was 140 kilos, and then if you combined 24 kilos for fat and protein, while keeping a positive fat and protein percentage. We'd like to put, and again, the health, we try to keep that as positive as we can. I generally don't like selecting bulls that are negative on health, and I don't think I've picked any in the last few years that have been negative on health. We try to keep that as high as possible also. And this is just a general overall profile of what the genetic merit of the herd in Lyons has been since the start of this project with first of all Dairy Tech and then Dairy Research Ireland. So we started off with pulling some heifers. We had a lot of cows in the Lyons herd that we recruited into the systems herd, and then to get up to the herd of 60, then we also bought in some animals from other herds. But what our criteria there was to work within the EBI system, because at that stage we had heard some, there's been some anecdotal evidence or people saying that, the EBI doesn't work for high input herds or high yielding herds. We found that it has. So we can select for high EBI cows, but also then pay attention to milk and fertility index. So sometimes you see this at the moment. There's a lot of people advertising heifers for sale on Dundee and other types of platforms, and they're talking about selling high EBI heifers for sale. It's important that you just don't focus on the overall EBI value, but you also look at what the milk and fertility sub-indices are as well, because you can have two very high EBI heifers, but because the EBI is an overall total of all the sub-indexes in the system, while they might have the same overall EBI value, there could be very, very different cows. So one cow might have a high EBI that's driven a lot by her fertility sub-index and have a very low milk sub-index, and in our experience then won't respond well to concentrates. And also you could have a high EBI cow she's very high in EBI simply because her milk sub-index is very high, but her fertility sub-index is very low, and therefore then she's got, it's going to be more difficult to get her in calf, which is again important for a seasonal calving system, whether you're high or low input. So what we do is we spend a lot of attention on looking at both getting milk and fertility index somewhat balanced, so that we can get good fertility while being able to respond to extra feeding in the parlour. So we've maintained our overall EBI has been at the top 1% over the last number of years. There was a drop from 2016 to 17, but that was due to the EBI base change, so all the herds would have dropped in the country at that stage. And also then we've stayed in the top 1 or 5% for milk and the top 10% for fertility. Again, these slides, this presentation is being recorded, so it's going to be available to everybody, so you can look at those other figures in more detail at a later stage. This is our October 2020 genetic evaluation for our systems herd at the moment. So this is the more recent one that we have. The overall EBI of the systems herd is €196. It's €70 for milk and 75 for fertility. So you can see that our breeding goal coming through, and actually what's happening in the genetic indices, and that we are trying, breeding goal in summary really is to have a balanced cow that has good milk and fertility, and we're achieving that. So it is possible to have animals that are good at both. It's more difficult because there's a negative correlation between both, but there are still some animals out there that are good at both. So it just takes a bit of time in choosing your bulls and mating to get the appropriate balance in your cows. And really, when we're picking bulls at Lyons, we pick a bull team, maybe 7, 8 bulls for the systems herd, but not all the bulls are not all the same, because we've got some cows in our systems herd that are good in milk and poor in fertility, and good in fertility and poor in milk. So the bulls should be complementing your cow's weakness. So if you've got a cow that's already very high in fertility but low in milk, your objective there should be to at least hold the fertility and find a bull then that can improve her milk production. So that's why, sometimes when you show people the list of bulls that we're using at Lyons, they'll see some bulls that are low in fertility, but those bulls are typically going to cows that are extremely high in fertility, but low in milk, and then we end up with this balanced cow at the end. So just to summarize overall the tools, and again I can expand on these in the Q&A session afterwards. The breeding tools that we use in UCD, well, the most important one is the economic breeding index from ICBF, the EBI. We're working within the EBI to achieve the genetics that are appropriate for a higher input, higher output system, and I think we're achieving that. It's also important to use a team of bulls, especially in the genomic era, where the reliability of bulls might be a little bit low now, or lower than what would be with daughter-proven bulls. Genomic bulls, however, are more genetically advanced on average than daughter-proven bulls, so we're trying to take advantage of that. And by using a team of bulls, it reduces the risk of not getting the genetic potential out of that team. If one bull turns out not to be very good, well, at least he hasn't been mated to all the cows in the herd, so you're spreading your risk across a number of bulls. We also do genomic testing of heifers, as I mentioned earlier on. That's to improve the overall reliability of selection of heifers that are coming into the herd. And I think genomic testing of heifers is a very valuable thing to do. I think at the moment, I was looking at our invoices the other day, I think it's about €22, including VAT, is the cost of genomically testing a heifer. And when you add that on to the cost of producing a heifer or getting her, it's a very small additional cost. And in the end, it could save you quite a lot of money, because if you've got excess heifers and you can sell some of your heifers to other dairy farmers, you're making sure that you're improving the probability that you are keeping the better heifers for yourself, and selling the heifers that don't meet your criteria, and also allows them for faster genetic improvement. So over time, then your herd will improve its genetic merit quite more quickly, combined with a good team of bulls, and you will and then the heifers you're selling will be that you don't want in your herd will be valuable to somebody else because you're making that genetic improvement. We've also in Lyons for the last few years have been using sex semen. We primarily use that on heifers because for two reasons. One is that heifers that have a better conception rate than older cows to sex semen, but also if your genetic improvement is working right, on average, your heifers should be the best animals in your herd. So what you're trying to do then is, or what we're trying to do in Lyons at least, is to breed as many of our replacements from our heifers as possible, and so using these technologies then it allows for greater rate of genetic improvement, and then with the right management system complementing those genetics, hopefully then you're seeing it yield a better profitability for your system. And again, these tools could be used regardless of if you're in a high input system or a low input system. They're tools that everybody could consider using. So with that, I'll hand you over to Professor Michael Wallace, who's our Professor of Agriculture and Food Economics in the School of Agriculture and Food Science. And again, I can take questions later on during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to discuss some aspects of the financial performance of the Lyons system. And I think if I can get the slides to work here. Yeah, there we go. From the inception of our project, we've engaged in detailed modeling of the dairy system to evaluate the system in terms of all its integral components, as I've shown on the slide here, and really to assess both the strengths and the weaknesses of the system. Now, one of the reasons why we want to engage in detailed modeling is that we can then assess different innovations within the production system. So we have a PhD student, Donald Walsh, who's been doing a lot of work in this area and looking at some innovations within the system, such as use of sex semen, use of technologies like fixed time AI, and also looking at other aspects of innovation within the system, for example, changes in stocking rates that we can then evaluate through computer simulations. So we can get a detailed evaluation of our system using this modeling approach. And I'm going to present some of that output. But I think a very valid question that we often get is, well, how does the Lyons system, what I've referred to as a moderate concentrate grazing system, MCGS, compare to the predominant low concentrate type system within Ireland? And you can see here, I've shown here a benchmark low concentrate grazing system with impressive levels of performance in terms of high efficiency in management, producing 450 kgs milk solids, fat and protein per cow on 350 kgs of concentrate feed on a per cow on a dry matter basis, and achieving high levels of output per hectare through a high stocking rate of 2.75 livestock units per hectare. So we're setting that as our benchmark system to compare the moderate concentrate Lyons type system, which I've shown on the right-hand side of this slide. And the performance information that you see here for the Lyons system uses an average of data for performance data for 3 years, namely 2016, 2017, and 2019. So it's the average of those 3 years. Now, I think another point that I should mention here, clearly we have omitted 2018, and that was because of the anomalous conditions that occurred in that year. And we have run the financial analysis certainly for 2018 as well. But for comparative purposes and to allow consistency in our comparison with the low concentrate grazing system, which we have represented under normal conditions, we have to compare both systems in a similar basis, assuming normal conditions, farming conditions in each system. So that's the reason why we've used those 3 years as our average. And you can see that the kind of performance which Finbar alluded to earlier. So average in those 3 years is 590 kgs per cow, milk solids, fat and protein, 2.4 livestock units per hectare farm stocking rate, and 1.3 tons dry matter concentrate input. So we have these two systems that we're comparing, and I'm going to show some financial results for that comparison. So if we take the sort of top line measures in a very simple way, we can see the contrast between the two systems here. And obviously the low concentrate grazing system in blue on the left, and the moderate concentrate grazing system, the Lyons system, on the right. Obviously with the higher levels of milk output, not surprisingly, the value of output from the system is higher in the Lyons system, giving a level of output from the system of about 800 euros per hectare higher than the low concentrate grazing system. But that is offset clearly by the higher direct costs, particularly in concentrate feeding. So when you go down to a gross margin basis, that difference is dissipated fairly quickly, and there's a much smaller gap between the two systems. So we move down to the next level, kind of a farm profit measure. You can see that the two systems provide comparable levels of performance on a per cow and per hectare basis, with the Lyons system giving a slightly higher level of farm profit per hectare here of about 57 euros per hectare. So this is before labour and rent and interest. So that farm profit measure corresponds to a farm profit for a farm with that has all family labour, all owned land, and no debt. So kind of that's the level, that's the profit measure that we're referring to there. What we then draw down to is doing a full economic costing of each system, where we account for all labour, land in the system, and interest, and we cost all of those components. And you can see here we've costed the imputed labour, which is the family labour that's involved in the system, on a per cow basis here. Obviously slightly higher for the moderate concentrate systems, I've shown here about an extra 56 euros per cow. So what we have is about a 4 hours per cow extra that we estimated was the requirement for the Lyons type system, reflecting the slightly higher management complexity involved in the system. And we did fairly detailed labour type analysis on the system to assess that differential. And similarly, we've quantified the requirements in terms of land, input, and capital inputs that allows us to get a full estimate of the economic profit of each system, accounting for all resources that are used by in each system. So you can see the bottom line here in terms of difference is that the Lyons system here performs competitively with the benchmark low concentrate system on a full economic profit basis here, and indeed gives a slight enhancement in terms of profit on both economic profit in both per cow and per hectare basis, as shown on this slide. I suppose the other thing to point out is that, of course, is based on our average level of performance. If we could hit the performance target that Finbar mentioned of the 625 kilos of milk solids per cow within the system, then that profit advantage would be somewhat higher, as shown here in yellow on the right-hand side. So within that comparison, you can see the assumptions. This is based on a base milk price of 30 cents per litre. We're costing all labour at 15 euros per hour, rent 420 per hectare, and interest on all capital tied up in each system at 5%. So the key message here is that the Lyons type system can be financially competitive with the benchmark low concentrate grazing system. We're not in any way trying to claim that one system is superior over the other, because obviously the system that a farmer chooses will have to be adapted to suit their specific conditions. And there will be certain farm situations where the moderate concentrate type system might be better suited to that farm's situation. I think I want to acknowledge, though, that there are clearly challenges in a high output pasture system. And I think that we need to recognize the critical importance of achieving the targets of the system and, you know, the consequences of not reaching those targets. So clearly, you know, the achievement of the level of milk yield response to the extra concentrate fed is absolutely critical. As you can see here, you know, just a 1% differential going off our milk output target per cow would correspond to a 10% change in economic profit. So it's quite sensitive, clearly, to deviating from that output target. And similarly for replacement rate, you know, 1% change in replacement rate corresponds to about an 8% change in economic profit. Again, so sensitive to replacement rates. In some of our analysis, we've shown that the Lyons type system can tolerate slightly higher replacement rates, but clearly there's a limit to that. And fertility is also important in a high output system, not just in a low input type production system. So important to recognize the importance of making those targets. Second point I think that's vital to address is that one can never get complacent really about, you know, just dumping in concentrates to substitute for poor grassland management. As Finbar outlined in the introduction to the presentation, that grassland management is obviously the cornerstone of the Lyons system, and it is a vitally important component of the system. The high levels of performance achieved are reflecting high standards of grassland management also. And the system is clearly sensitive to price variables, both in terms of milk price, as I show here, but obviously in particular to variations in concentrate price, clearly because of the higher levels of concentrate feeding. So you have at least triple the level of sensitivity to concentrate pricing in your economic profit in this case. And that has to be recognized as one of the risk factors. So overall, it means that the higher output system involves additional management complexity to some degree. And for that reason, it may be somewhat less forgiving, as I've said here, to the low concentrate type grazing system. And that needs to be recognized in any comparison. We do a full stress testing of the performance of the systems, doing a risk analysis to account for sources of risk, particularly in terms of variation in obviously the output price and also our input prices. So what we've done in a lot of our simulations is taking 10 years of data to account for the types of variability we've seen in prices and also in terms of fertility as well included in this analysis. To fully stress test our system to understand how variable that the margins may be in response to variation in underlying prices in particular, and to get an estimate of the distribution of profit. And what I show here in this slide is the two systems presented in a kind of a compact way using a cumulative profit distribution. So along the bottom here, we have the economic profit per hectare. And you can see the range in our simulation going from the worst case kind of circumstances where you have, for example, very low milk price through to the best case possible circumstance where we have a much higher milk prices. And then on the vertical axis, we have cumulative probability. So there are a number of things that one is looking for in this type of graph. One of the things that we're looking for is how far the curves are to the right. So curves that are further to the right imply greater levels of profitability. So that's a good thing. However, if the curves are, if a curve tends to be flatter, that means there's more risk involved. So we're looking at the shape of the curve to see is it flatter or steeper. So a flatter curve means more risk. And the other thing you can do is look at specific levels on the curve. So you can see here I've taken the 0 level of economic profit, and I go up to the curve and then across to the probability level, and I can then read off the probability of profit being below that level. So in this case of us not returning an economic profit per hectare is about 10%, or conversely there's a 90% chance in any year that each of the systems will return a positive economic profit per hectare. And the other thing you can look at is the midpoint. So that's our central projection here at the 0.5 probability level. And you can see the two systems are almost identical in terms of a level of economic profit per hectare, as shown here, of close to 700 euros per hectare in our central projection. The upper end of the distribution, you can see that the moderate concentrate system can provide some upside potential, particularly when milk prices are high. You've got that higher level of output, and that then can return a certain edge in terms of profitability. But on the other hand, there's some additional downside risk particularly when milk prices are lower. You can see the curve here of the red line for the moderate concentrate system is to the left, giving slightly lower levels of profitability. But I think one of the interesting things that emerged for us and that kind of surprised us somewhat was that the level of risk between the two systems did not differ greatly. I think probably our initial expectation was that we would have seen substantially greater levels of risk with the moderate concentrate grazing system, but that has not been revealed in our analysis. Certainly when the systems are well managed, the levels of risk are indeed on a per hectare basis are comparable. The last thing I'm just going to mention is in relation to stocking density considerations, and clearly this has been in the media quite a lot, particularly in the context of the nitrates derogation and the reliance of many of our dairy farmers on nitrates derogations, and then of course that policy has been progressively tightened. So one of the things that we wanted to assess in our simulation models is how do the comparable systems perform in a non-derogation type scenario. So if stocking rates are curtailed to 2 livestock units per hectare, what does the distributions of profitability look like? And I have that here on the system. And what is clear here is that the moderate concentrate grazing system certainly can perform to a superior degree when stocking rate is curtailed in the way that I've just indicated. And that's for obvious reasons, in that we have higher levels of output per cow, allowing us to continue to preserve output per hectare accordingly. And what I show here is the original baseline figures in the derogation situation. And I think it's important to realize that both systems suffer fairly substantial reductions in profitability through removal of a derogation. So if you take that derogation away, you can see the curves are shifting to the left, reducing profitability quite substantially. And indeed, for the moderate concentrate grazing system, that shift back in average profitability is about 260 euros per hectare and about 430 euros per hectare for the low concentrate grazing system. So the lower concentrate grazing system is certainly more exposed to that, given that it was operating on higher stocking rate to achieve high levels of output per hectare. So curtailing stocking rates in any way then is more detrimental to that system on that basis. So I think this is an important additional consideration that needs to be part of the debate as we compare individual production systems and their financial potential. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Assistant Professor Zoe McKay, who will continue the presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michael. So my name is Zoe McKay, and I'm going to focus for the last 2 minutes of the presentation just on the environmental aspect and some more of the recent research that we're carrying out in Lyons. So as you would have heard from my colleagues, we've looked at the the performance to date, the genetics element, and also the financial performance. And what we can see is that a high output grass-based system can be profitable when we really focus on our grassland management and that we meet particular performance targets. But I suppose the next question is, how does this system, just like any dairy system, impact on our environmental sustainability and our carbon footprint, which, as you all know, is one of the biggest challenges that are facing the system at the moment. So in order to investigate this, one of the interesting things to consider is what we call a life cycle analysis. And we have collaborated with Professor Nick Holden and Dr. Pooja Sharman in UCD to determine that. And so the life cycle analysis really is focusing on assessing the environmental aspects and the potential impact that a product and its life cycle will have on the environment. So we look at all of our inputs, throughputs and outputs from production, feeding, number of cows and replacement rate, the fertilizer inputs, the housing time, all of these elements come under the life cycle analysis. And what we get out from it in terms of output from this is we know what our impact is in terms of kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of fat and protein corrected milk. So what I have to show you today is the data that we've carried out for the life cycle analysis for the systems herd in 2016 and 2017, which is highlighted in the two green bars. So in 2016, we had a life cycle analysis of 0.94. And in 2017 was 0.88. And in order to compare this, I've graphed it to the Teagasc 2027 Dairy Sectorial Roadmap. So the current average life cycle analysis for the national herd is 1.13. We have a target to reach by 2027 of 0.96. And at a research level, the target research performance is 0.86. So you can see that from our 2016 and 27 data that we're pretty much on par, if not slightly below the target, which is a good position to be in. However, we are currently working on updating this and we're running the life cycle analysis for 2018, 2019 and 2020. And the main reason that we're running this again is because we have improved and adapted a number of methods and technologies within the system that we believe would have a positive impact on our life cycle analysis. So for example, we've looked at incorporating protected urea. We spread our slurry with low emission slurry spreading technologies. As you'll see from earlier in the presentation, we have improved our fertility significantly and we've also improved our replacement rate. Also, another important thing to point out is during the grazing season, we're offering the cows a supplementary concentrate nut that's based on a low crude protein, and we're also incorporating native feed ingredients. So we believe that all of these things will come in together under the life cycle analysis and hopefully further improve that result. When we're talking about the environment, it's also really important, as Michael mentioned too, obviously around nitrates and the nitrogen use efficiency of our system. And we are currently working on that data and we'll hopefully have that in the coming weeks. So when we look just kind of, I suppose, summarise the findings that you've seen and been reported today. So a high level of milk output is possible in cows that are selected on a multi-trait index in a grazing system. I think this is a very important message to consider because I suppose the opinion has been for quite a while is that high EBI cows are associated with low output. The fertility targets they're achieved have been achieved in high output grazing cows. And again, it's another important point because it's demonstrating, I suppose, the advances in breeding that we have made and that high output is not necessarily linked with poor fertility. High input grazing systems can be profitable. As Michael discussed earlier with his simulations, we can see that a high input, high output system can be profitable. And again, this is somewhat, I suppose, contrary to the common belief that any high input system or any system that needs additional inputs would obviously be impacted in terms of profitability. And from the life cycle analysis that we have to date, we see that our environmental emissions are being diluted by a higher output. And that will further be supported when we have the 2018 to 2020 data for the life cycle analysis. So just to move on to the last section for this morning. So we're looking at the recent research carried out in Lyons that I want to share with you. And again, this is in the area of environmental sustainability. So within the systems research herd, we've kind of taken things a step further and looked at, I suppose, answering some of the environmental questions around dairy production and dairy production systems. So as you're all well aware, one of the biggest concerns at the moment is obviously the nitrates directive. And it's a big area of concern that the department is currently directing at farm level, but it's the level of crude protein that's in our concentrate supplements that are fed to our dairy cows when they're grazing during the summer months. And based on this, we wanted to put our focus on how we reduce the nitrogen loss to the environment by reducing the level of crude protein fed to our dairy cows. So in 2019, we set out to answer this. We wanted to look at supplementing with a lower crude protein and what influence that would have on milk production and nitrogen loss from the cows in the system. So what we did was we compared a 14% crude protein concentrate that was fed to the parlour with an 18% crude protein concentrate nut. And this was fed from 2nd of April, so the start of the second grazing rotation, the whole way through to the 7th of October, which would be just the start of the last grazing rotation. And the aim here was to collect data around the pasture intakes of the cows, the milk production composition, and also to measure the level of nitrogen that was being excreted. So from this study to date, we have our performance data in terms of particularly, I suppose, our fat and protein kilos, which you can see here for the two treatments, whether it be 14% or 18% crude protein concentrate, that there was no significant difference between the level of fat and protein kilos that were being produced. And the same can be said for milk yield, where both groups were producing just 29.9, 29.4 kilograms of milk yield. And I suppose following from the study, we would have a lot of confidence in that you can use lower crude protein supplements for cows at grass, bearing in mind that grazed pasture has a very high protein content in it. So in terms of the nitrogen excretion and intakes data, that is still to come for this study, but it'll be interesting to see kind of where that leads us in terms of nitrogen output when we reduce from an 18% to a 14% crude protein nut. This year, in 2020, we've taken things a step further, and I wanted to look at further reducing the level of crude protein in the supplement that was offered to grazing dairy cows. So we wanted to look also at the composition of the supplement that was being offered, and we wanted to focus on incorporating primarily native feed ingredients into that concentrate. And the aim of this is that native feed ingredients that are grown here in Ireland wouldn't necessarily have the same carbon footprint associated with bringing the likes of your maize and soybean meal in from abroad. And this definitely offers an environmental advantage. So in 2020, we looked at the three different treatments. We looked at a 14% crude protein nut, which we'd seen in 2019 was adequate for grazing dairy cows. And we wanted to look even further at a lower crude protein. So we went to 12% crude protein in the supplementary concentrate. So to answer our question then around our native and non-native feed ingredients, we had two groups that were on a 12% protein, one that was made up of, with a concentrate made up of non-native ingredients and one that was made up of native ingredients. So again, this is looking at the same period of time. So we're going to go from April to October, so our main grazing season. And we were looking again at comparing these three different diets in terms of milk production, milk composition, intakes and nitrogen excretion. So just to give you an idea, here on this slide, it shows the 14% protein nut, or this would be typical of a conventional nut. And we can see we have some native ingredients, such as rolled barley. However, the majority is made up of imported ingredients, such as your maize, ground maize, maize distillers, soya hulls and soybean meal. Again, even when we go to our 12% protein non-native nut, we do have some rolled barley there, but we also have, we still also have a number of imported ingredients, particularly the maize distillers, soya hulls and soybean meal, although the soybean meal is included at a slightly lower level to give us that 12% protein. When we're talking then about our 12% protein native nut, we can see there's a lot of ingredients here that are native to Ireland. We have rolled oats, rolled barley, wheat feed, and the main protein source is coming from rolled beans. So we wanted to look in 2020 to see if we could use a 12% crude protein nut that's mainly based on native feed ingredients as a supplement to grazing dairy cows. Again, like I said, between April and October. That's the main grazing season. So what I have to, based on this trial, which finished there in October of last year, is provisional data. So we haven't got this statistically analysed yet, but I just wanted to share it with you as to kind of what is going on currently on the ground. So when we look here in terms of our milk yield, for the 14% and the 12%, we see no difference in terms of milk yield or, more importantly, fat and protein kilos. All three treatments produce 2.13 kilograms of fat and protein. So this is suggesting that we can move from a 14 lower to a 12%, but also that the native and non-native, we see no difference here as well. So regardless of the source of those ingredients, we don't take a hit in terms of animal performance. So statistical analysis is ongoing here as well. So we will also have the nitrogen excretion data for this study. So these preliminary results would indicate that a protein concentrate as low as 12% in a supplementary dairy nut may sustain milk production levels for high output grazing cows. And it's important to remember, just as I mentioned, like we really see here the high level of protein that's coming through in the grass. Supplementary dairy nuts based on high usage of native feed ingredients may result in similar performance to that of dairy cows fed supplements based on imported ingredients. And I think personally, this is a very important point moving forward. We're striving to reduce our carbon footprint and increase the sustainability of not only Irish dairy, but also of Irish agriculture and the supporting role we can play between the different disciplines in terms of the dairy industry incorporating dairy native feed ingredients and the supporting role that can play to the Irish tillage sector. So both lower protein concentrations in the feed and the use of native feed ingredients may improve the sustainability of Irish dairy production. And again, we aim to support this with our further analysis of our life cycle analysis from the systems herd. So finally, just to finish up and talk a little bit about our dissemination. So obviously in terms of with COVID, before COVID, we hosted many farmer discussion groups. We could have between 500 and 1,000 farmers visit the farm every year. However, obviously with COVID restrictions, that wasn't able to happen this year. So we very much hope that this webinar will reach as many of you as possible who are interested in the project and hope that one day in the future we can welcome you to visit the herd at Lyons. In addition, in terms of our dissemination, we attend many stakeholder meetings. We have a lot of international delegates that come to visit the project. We're active on social media. Our Twitter handle is @UCD_systemsherd. We publish weekly notes online. We have, through the UCD website, we have weekly notes that start again from February. We have a 3-year report there that summarises the output from 16 to 18, and we have a 1-year report for 2019. Also, in terms of dissemination, particularly of our recent research, will be aimed at different scientific conferences and for publication in international scientific journals. So, as Finbar mentioned this morning, we wish to acknowledge the support of Dairy Tech and the support of Teagasc, but also the support of Dairy Research Ireland, who are currently funding this research project. We would also like to extend our thanks and appreciation to the full UC team at Lyons Farm, including the farm staff and postgraduate students who've all contributed to making this project happen and for the ongoing day-to-day running of it. So from all of us in the UCD Dairy Research team, we'd like to thank you very much for your attendance and for your listening today.